onto it, though I don't think the Kremlin has confirmed that yet, is the Board of Peace. And we've seen the countries who have already signed on. So far, the only Western European nation is Hungary, obviously a close ally of Russia's. And when you look at that stage that was here in Davos today that the president was sharing with, and the White House says, these invitations just went out on Friday. They say more people will join, they believe, in the coming weeks and months. But as the former United Nations ambassador, I wonder what you make of who was on that stage today and the president's suggestion that this Board of Peace could replace the United Nations.
It's not going to replace the United Nations because it is not representative of the world at large. First of all, the composition of that board is really a parade of authoritarian strongmen and dubious Democrats who may have been elected once or twice, like Orban, and have governed as autocrats. There really are no serious Democratic partners yet to have joined that board, with the arguable exception of Israel, and their circumstances are rather unique in this regard, and they curiously were absent at the convening today. The problem with this Board of Peace is it's not a Board of Peace in which the represented countries have a full voice and a vote. It's Donald Trump's attempt to play king of the world. He is the sole convener. He's the sole decider of who participates. He's the sole decider of how much people have to pay to God knows whom to be able to be permanent members of this thing. And above all, he's the only one with a veto. And it's not the United States that has a veto. It's Donald J. Trump who has a veto, who will keep himself in this role in perpetuity if he chooses, or until he passes, or he decides to hand it off to one of his sons or son-in-laws or somebody else of his choice. It's not a serious endeavor, and the reason why you don't see serious countries signing up to be part of this is because they're not prepared to subordinate their voice and their vote to Donald Trump.
He's the chairman, and my colleague Sam Waldenberg asked him as they were flying back tonight, could he see himself staying on as chairman after he leaves office, after this second term is up? And he said basically potentially. I mean, what would that look like for the next U.S. president if he's still chair of this Board of Peace?
Well, first of all, what is this Board of Peace actually going to do? Let's actually see it try to do something. I think, it will disintegrate when Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States. And I'm actually very dubious that in the meantime, between now and then, that it will be able to do anything of any significance. I think some of the subsidiary bodies that have been constructed to deal with the Gaza circumstance may have some, a real agenda and a potential to play a role. But beyond Gaza, and beyond, frankly, it was only Gaza for which the Security Council gave this Board of Peace a mandate. It's hard to see how it does anything. Is the United States, as chairman and leader of this Board of Peace, going to deploy peacekeepers to Congo or Darfur or any of the number of places where the United Nations is putting, blood and sweat on the line? I doubt it. So I don't really know what this thing is going to do, except stoke Donald Trump's ego.
Ambassador Susan Rice, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you, Caitlin.
And up next, for the first time, we heard from Jack Smith testifying publicly about his past prosecutions